Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. We appreciate your attendance today. My name is Mark Beech, and I'm a principal consultant with Bennett Adelson. And we've heard recently a lot of feedback from our customers, a lot of kind of buzz in the industry around Azure AD B2C. And we thought we'd just put this webinar together to kind of talk through, kind of do a bit of a make you aware of what it can do, more understanding around federation and how you can use Azure B2C. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them during the presentation. And if we don't have time at the end, then we'll reach out to you directly to answer those. Okay, so just give me 1 second here. Azure B2C is Azure business to consumer, and the Microsoft line here is that it's Azure Active Directory B2C is an identity management service that enables customers to control how enables custom control of how your customers sign up, sign in, and manage their profiles when using your applications. So this is basically authentication management in a box as a service within Azure. So to understand this, let's kind of let's go back to how things used to be, and in some cases still are, where back in the day, we're all kind of familiar with this scenario. We had an application or a website, and we managed a database of users that could access that. So our users would authenticate, and their identity for our application or our website was only valid there. It was kind of in an island, and for many cases, this works fine. The downside is we're on the hook for maintaining the security of this authentication, and we have to maintain the infrastructure that supports this, and we also have to manage those users. So we're talking password resets, creating and deleting users, all that kind of stuff. So this is okay in many scenarios, like I say, but in the modern world, we all know we have many sign-ons for different applications, websites, and we need some element of single sign-on to kind of calm the noise. So the typical way that we achieve this is with federation. So in a nutshell, what federated authentication means is my customer comes to my website, my application, my service, and I no longer authenticate them and maintain that authentication mechanism myself. And instead, I'm going to authenticate them against an identity provider where their identity exists already and that I trust as a valid source of authentication. So that could be a social media network like Facebook or Twitter. Maybe it's your company Active Directory through ADFS. Any number of different identity providers. So to kind of understand this process, we're going to talk about a few federation concepts. The main things to get your head around are we have sign-in protocols, we have authentication protocols, and we have token types. So if we take this to a non-technical scenario, if we take the example of taking a flight back when we felt comfortable with that before coronavirus, we would arrive at an airport, find a kiosk, print a boarding pass, and that would allow us to get on an aircraft. So this whole process is an example of a sign-in protocol. So you'll see these as SAML, OpenID Connect, WS Federation. So you think of this whole process that may vary airline to airline, airport to airport, but we're basically doing the same sequence of things, just slightly different. As is the case with the different sign-in protocols. So when we got that boarding pass, we didn't just give it, we had to prove who we were to receive that boarding pass. So we presented some kind of passport or identification, depending on where we're flying. Think of this as your authentication protocol. So most common would be forms or Kerberos. So forms is your typical sort of username and password, web page sign-on. If you've ever used your desktop Outlook client to access your Office 365 mail from a domain-joined machine, and you didn't have to put in your password, that's Kerberos. It's using your Active Directory, whatever. It's using a different authentication protocol. However, that was achieved. Ultimately, we receive our, in this case, boarding pass, or and you can think of that as your token. So the token types that we typically see are SAML. So SAML is a sign-in protocol, and it's a token type, or JWT. So SAML tokens are typically used by WS Federation or SAML, and OpenID Connect would use JWT token. So I'm just going to talk you through the various phases of the federated authentication and what's actually happening behind the scenes. So in this example, my customer comes to my website, and the first thing that we're doing is performing some form of home realm discovery. So I want to know where my user's identity exists, and then that's going to allow me to redirect this whole process. So the home realm discovery could be as simple as we've all seen these buttons where you want to continue with Google or authenticate with Facebook. That's one way to do a home realm discovery. If you've ever logged on to portal.office.com, you'll notice it just asks you for your email address initially. And that's another form of home realm discovery. So initially, it doesn't really care who you are. It just cares about that domain name. So behind the scenes, the Office website is saying, with this domain name, do we have a federated trust with an identity provider for that domain? Yes, we do. Okay, home realm discovery is completed. So with this information, what happens is the browser or application is then redirected to that identity provider, and it's going to do a couple of things. So it's going to say to your browser, let's go and authenticate over here. You're going to use this sign-in protocol because it's the sign-in protocol that I want to use. And after you've authenticated, or when you return to me with this information. So that's the first stage of the federated authentication. So now my browser application has been redirected to my identity provider, and I'm prompted to authenticate with some form of authentication protocol. So again, that could be username and password box for a website, or maybe it's Kerberos. Whatever happens, I'm authenticated with that identity provider, and the identity provider is going to look at the redirect and say, okay, you're authenticating as part of this federated trust. Here's your identity token to say, I have said that you are who you say you are, and I'm also going to give you some claims. Now, claims are basically just information about that user that the identity provider holds. So it could be something that's useful just in general, like name, contact details, address, maybe. A claim could also be something like group membership, like maybe your account is a member of a certain AD group, and when we get back to our service provider, that would dictate what access you would have to your service provider. So our user's browser now has a identity token to confirm that they are who they say they are. They have claims, information about them that could be useful in the process, and now their browser is going to be redirected back to the service provider. So here I am. My browser now comes back to the service provider. It's come back to my website, and I'm given the identity token, so I know that you've been authenticated against a identity provider that I trust and I have a trust relationship with. And then I've got these claims. So based on those two things, my the service provider is going to issue the browser with two new tokens. There's going to be an access token. There's going to be a refresh token. The access token is going to give me access to my service, my website, my application, with the correct privileges that have been defined. Maybe that's by claims, maybe just everybody gets the same. And then also, I'm going to be given a refresh token. So typically, an access token has a short lifespan, and a refresh token will have a long lifespan. And the purpose of this is to provide a mechanism where we don't have to go through those last few steps every time we want to come into the app. So say my my access token that's giving me access to my service is valid for 1 day, and my refresh token is valid for 1 week. Every time my access token expires, I can get a new access and refresh token from the service provider using these tokens. And so that means in this scenario, as long as I use this application once a week, then I'm never going to have to go back to get a new identity token from my identity provider. It can continue to refresh. If my refresh token expires, then I've got to go back. Or if my browser cache is cleared, that's going to remove my tokens. I'm going to have to go and authenticate again. But this essentially, this is one of the greatest things with Azure B2C. This whole process is kind of contained within Azure B2C. We can configure how we want all of this to happen, and we don't have to tackle the daunting task of sort of managing and creating this. We can do it through Azure B2C. So one other thing I want to touch on whilst we're talking about federation and protocols is there's a lot of I've been confused myself in the past. There's a lot of very difficult to read articles out there talking about the differences between the different protocols and how things work, and particularly with OAuth and OpenID Connect. So the thing to get your head around here is that OAuth is a authorization protocol. It's not an authentication protocol, and it's used to give my my service provider access to some information about me from my identity provider, or to perform some kind of an action. So in the example we've got here, a user is using using my my website. Imagine this in the old school island identity type scenario that I mentioned earlier. And my website says to me, it says to my user, it seems like you're really enjoying this. Would you like to, could we post something on your Facebook wall to say that you like this, or can we access your contacts? And my user says, yes, I'd like to do that. So this performs a redirect using OAuth, and it's going to say, in the case of a Facebook, if it's redirecting to Facebook to post on the Facebook wall, I'm redirected there. I authenticate with Facebook, and then it's going to ask me, this service provider would like to perform these actions on your behalf. Is that okay? If I click yes, the service provider is going to be given an authorization token to perform that task. So typically these are very limited tokens that will allow either to do something for a very short period of time, or to do a very specific task. So that's OAuth in a nutshell. It's not for authentication. And the problem that happened was what was happening. People liked OAuth, liked how convenient it was, and they were writing custom code to use OAuth for authentication, not authorization. And so what happened is we ended up with a lot of a lack of standardization in the industry. And so along came OpenID Connect. And OpenID Connect is basically a authentication protocol built on top of the OAuth authorization framework. So OpenID Connect sits on top of OAuth, and it provides the federated access to an application that we discussed earlier. So I go to my service provider, they redirect me to my identity provider, get an identity token, exchange that for an access token, and I've got access to my app. That's what OpenID Connect is, as opposed to OAuth. So Azure B2C protocol support. So we've got support for OAuth 1.0, 2.0, OpenID Connect, and SAML protocols. We don't have access in Azure B2C for WS Federation. I've heard rumors that it's coming, but I don't know if that's true or not. My advice on sign-in protocols would be, if you're building a new app, or if you have the option to use OpenID Connect, I would lean in that direction. Think of OpenID Connect as kind of just a more updated version of SAML in many ways. It allows you to, communication doesn't all have to happen in the browser. You can create back channels to make it more secure. It's got much better support for mobile apps and that kind of thing. But if you have an app that currently uses SAML, B2C will support that also. The other thing I wanted to touch on here was that for my explanation earlier, the terminology I was using was SAML terminology, just because it kind of makes a bit more sense to my brain. But just to confuse things, OpenID Connect has a separate set of terminology. So in SAML, the website or the application that we're trying to access, in SAML, that would be called a service provider. And in OpenID Connect, that would be called a relying party. And the thing that is authenticating the user that we're redirected to in SAML is an identity provider. In OpenID Connect, that's an OpenID provider. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. In terms of configuration with Azure B2C, so as well as the federated authentication that we can build that we just discussed, you can also use the older model and have a user database locally within your B2C client that minimizes the downsides that we talked about before, because you can it's basically using the Azure AD within your Azure AD B2C tenant. So if you trust Azure AD security, it's all the same thing here. And we can also build in things like self-service, password resets, and user management tools for those accounts. So with B2C, we can, if we've got clients that don't have their own identity providers, we can use this facility here. We've also got built-in support for many of the identity providers that your clients probably do have already. There's listed at the bottom here. If there's additional ones, there's custom scripts and things, custom policies that we can create to accommodate pretty much anything that uses the supported protocols. The user sign-on area for B2C can be customized to match the look and feel of your website, so we can have branding and stuff on there. And we've also got support out of the box for 36 different languages. In terms of cost, the pricing model is based on monthly active users. So the first 50,000 monthly active users are free, and the definition of a monthly active user is someone that logs on during that time. It doesn't matter if they log on one time or 1,000 times within that monthly span, they count as one user. So the first 50,000 users in a month are free, and the next 50,000 are 0.0055 cents. And then we've got these other cost tiers here based on numbers. If you're a EA customer, they use a slightly different model at the box. It's kind of just one flat fee. It's not a tiered, but you can switch to the monthly active user tiered model. I believe the free tier remains the same, and the other ones are just reducing cost. So let's have a quick look at this thing in action. So if I log on to my Azure tenant, this is my just my lab tenant here. Think of this like your company tenant. I actually don't, you don't provision Azure B2C within this tenant. You run through a process that generates a new Azure B2C dedicated tenant. And we can link the subscriptions from our corporate tenant to the B2C tenant, so that you don't have to maintain multiple subscriptions. You can also have a subscription in the B2C tenant, but this seems, with the price involved, this seems like a simpler method. The way that you would access your B2C tenant, just like you'd switch tenants normally. I apologize for the name. The domain name Purple Boot Polish was cheap and available, so that's what we went with. So this is my Azure B2C tenant. Looks much like a regular tenant, but it's optimized. There's a few things in here that are different. Rick will, when I hand over to him, will kind of dig a little bit deeper on some of these items here, but this is your main kind of interface. So we have app registrations. We configure identity providers here. So in this case, we've got Facebook, Microsoft accounts, and the local accounts that I discussed are provisioned. If you've got additional OpenID Connect identity providers, there's facility to do that. SAML would require a custom policy, and so these identity provider built-ins, obviously this configures the B2C side of the trust relationship. So there's also, with each one of these, there's work that needs to be done on the other side to complete that trust relationship between the two. And so we've got branding policies. So here we've got our purplish boots and our company branding. We can define attributes that we want to work with. There's many that are built in, and then we've got custom attributes also. And then here we've got sort of an interface into our Azure Active Directory. So as you can see here, my Facebook account has an equivalent Azure B2C Azure AD account. And then my local user also has an account. So much like with Office 365, where you probably have a on-prem AD account and you use an AD Connect, sync those accounts up to Azure AD. Same kind of thing here. We've got a representation of that account within our Azure B2C tenant. We also configure workflows. This is kind of our sandbox environment, so it's a lot going on in here. But this is where we would define our look and feel and user experience, user flow for various tasks, whether that's signing up and signing in or password resets. We can define these. And I can show you what this looks like. So within this workflow here for sign up and sign in, we can control token attributes and session behavior. We can select for this particular one which identity providers that I've configured do I want to supply. It may vary depending on which app you're using. When people sign up, what attributes do I want to log? And when people federate, what claims? And obviously, these claims here, some of these are built in. You can have custom ones, but part of the process of making the federated trust between us and the identity provider, we have to match those up. So if we've got a custom attribute here, we have to have some kind of mapping to follow that through. We can define our page layout, and we can the language. So here I've just got English configured, but I could configure any one of these. I think it's 36, I said. So let's take a look at this in action very quickly. I'm going to do an incognito browser session here, so there's no tokens in here. So as you can see, I've got my branding that I defined, I've got my company name, and I've got the identity providers that I selected from my list. So if I were to click on Facebook, this is redirecting my browser straight to Facebook. And if you see at the top here, as I was saying about before, within here, it's going to define, I want you to authenticate with this sign-in protocol, and I want you to come back here when you're done. So if I just sign on here, Facebook's now authenticating me, and it's handing me back an identity token of my claims, redirecting my browser back to my service provider, and I have my access. So in a nutshell, this is a very basic form in this lab environment, but that's essentially what it's doing. Everything between my service provider and the identity provider and the user, that big gap in between is what Azure B2C is taking care of for me. Can be quite a daunting task to set up yourself, but we've kind of got this great facility to do this. So I'm now going to hand over to Rick, who is going to talk a bit more on the kind of developer side.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Let me switch over to take control here. There we go. So this is what caught me right here, free, for 50,000 active users. So that's amazing. So why do we want, from a developer perspective, why would we want to use Azure B2C, besides the free part, which is pretty compelling? There's a list of users. All of the functionality that this provides would be a daunting task to have to implement yourself. Identity is hard. All of these things are very complex business logic, complex workflows. The security, the authentication, all of that stuff is something that most developers would prefer not to build. So this you can very easily add to your applications. You can do all sorts of things. Out of the box, you have a lot of functionality, but it comes with a very extensible framework. So you can really create whatever authentication process or user journey that your applications require. Most of it you can do out of the box, but it's very relatively simple to integrate with your line of business applications, et cetera, for claims validation or augmentation. So it's a very robust framework. It provides one identity management experience for all of your devices, all of your applications. So this is not one Azure AD B2C tenant per app. This is one for all of your apps. And it supports all of your devices, whether it's a mobile app, a desktop app, a web app, whatever. There's a way to integrate with all of those applications. Getting started is really not that difficult. You create your B2C tenant, register your application or applications. You configure your identity providers, whether that's Facebook or Microsoft or Google or whoever. You create your user flows, and actually probably configure would be a better word here, because most of the user flows that you'll use serve whatever your requirements are, pretty straightforward. So you can just configure those for your application and use them as is. And then you just update your apps or create your new apps to use the B2C authentication. User flows. So this is what drives the user experience in your app. So there's different flows. These are all out of the box. So there's different flows for sign in, sign up, for profile editing, password reset. You can have separate sign up and sign in flows. All of them support multi-factor authentication. And they're really just simple to configure. You can configure them in the B2C portal. There's no code involved. It's pretty straightforward, simple to use. For more complex scenarios, there are custom policies that you can create, and these give you really a whole lot of flexibility and a whole lot of power. The idea here is that it's all built on the identity experience framework. You create your custom policies, and you can mix and match all of these various kinds of flows. So you can authenticate to social accounts. You can have multi-factor authentication. You can do user input validation. So, for example, if someone is logging into airline site and they enter their frequent flyer number, you can integrate with a third-party application through a REST API and validate that frequent flyer number, that's the right number for the user. Or you can look it up. Again, a lot of flexibility. The power of the REST API is really allows you to do a lot and serve a lot of your business requirements. Application integration is pretty straightforward. You have, for each of your scenarios, your user flows, whether it's sign in or sign up, the app will take them to a different URL, and then once they're finished, it'll return a token back to your application. And again, this is for multiple applications, so you don't need to create separate user flows or separate B2C tenants for different applications. All of your applications can use the same flows or different flows within the same tenant. In the case for more complex scenarios, you can create a custom policy and integrate with a REST service. So here's a loyalty number example. So the user signs in, they enter their username, password, or signs up with their email address, and they enter their loyalty number. You can make a call from Azure B2C to your web service, REST service, to validate that loyalty number or to look up the loyalty number and then return that loyalty number as part of a claim within the token to your application. One thing I should mention is currently Azure B2C does not support group claims or role claims. So when you get a token back from B2C, it will not include, out of the box, will not include the groups that the user is a member of or the roles in B2C that the user has. You can add those through a REST service. So for example, we've done it with Azure Functions. So you have a simple Azure function that you pass the user ID, the Azure function queries the Graph API and gets the user's groups and gets their roles and returns them back and they're added to the token that's passed on to your application. So not out of the box, but not too difficult to implement. Another scenario for a custom flow would be user migration. So if you currently have an identity system now that you're using, whether it's your own database that you have of users, and you want to move to Azure B2C, there's really two methods to migrate users. You can do it pre-migrate. You can migrate all of your users, assuming that you have access to the credentials, to their username and password. You can just simply import those and bring those into your B2C tenant. If you don't if the password's encrypted, obviously you can't use that. So what you can do is import the users and create their accounts. And then when they log in to your website or your application the next time, you can direct them with a custom user flow. You can check to see if they have already created their account in your system. And if not, you can have them authenticate, and this would be a seamless experience for them. So they would still authenticate with your current identity provider. If it's valid, then the password is updated in the B2C tenant. The flag is set, so we know that user no longer requires migration, and then the token is issued back to the application. So, nice, simple way to provide a seamless user experience. The users don't know that you've switched. You're using a different identity provider. You're using B2C now. They simply log in the same way, and they're migrated on the fly. Another big issue here, a reason to use this, is that again, identity is hard. So having to build all this and manage all this and secure all this and monitor it, is a lot of work. So it's end-to-end encryption. It's just like Azure Active Directory. So it's very secure, very robust. There's auditing and analytics, so you can see what your users are doing and when they're doing it. There's a lot of information that you can get back from Azure B2C. So we're going to take a look at a quick demo. This is a Woodgrove Groceries demo. So this is a Microsoft demo that they've created for B2C. And in this experience, there's three different roles, if you will. So there's individual customers would sign in with their personal account or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. Business customers that would sign in with a work or school account, an Office 365 or Microsoft 365 account. And then there's business partners. So these would be your B2B partners that you have a relationship with and have federated trust with already in your organization. So let's switch over here and let me find my browser. There we are. So this is Woodgrove Groceries. So when I come to here, I want to shop and buy some groceries. I'm presented, this is, I go to the site, I'm presented with a screen. I could sign in or sign up. I'm sorry, sign in over here and sign up over here. And these are examples of two of those out of the box user flows. So if I click on sign in, I come to this page and I can pick what kind of, who do I want to authenticate as? An individual customer, business customer, partners. We're going to focus on the social and the individual accounts today. So we'll be using the individual customers. So I can sign in with my personal account, or I can sign up if I don't already have one. So let's sign in. Either way, I'm going to present it with a dialog that I can sign up as well. So this is an example of the customization that you can do. And this is customization is all done within the Azure B2C tenant. So the page is the background image. Instead of purple boots, we have some grocery items here. The user form here to sign in is customizable. So you could customize the HTML here. You can add custom CSS. This has been add some custom CSS to brand it to the site. You can do all of that again from within the Azure B2C tenant. In this case, we have identity providers for Google, Microsoft, Facebook, or I can sign in just with a local account with my email address, and I create a password. And again, this would be stored in the Azure B2C tenant. And I can authenticate directly with Azure B2C. If I don't have an account, I can click on Sign Up Now, and I'm taken to another user flow or another policy. And this policy has elements defined for my email address, password. We're also capturing some additional user claims here. So the name, my account ID, if I have an account with Woodgrove, so I can order groceries and have them charged to my account. You can have custom terms of service. So when users sign up, you can have them agree to your terms of service before they can create their account. There's also functionality built in for multi-factor authentication and for email and phone number verification. So if I enter my email address here, I'll click on the button Send a Code. I'll get an email that says, here's your code. And it's branded with our Purple Boot Polish Company logo there. And then I would use this code to paste in here to validate my email address. So let's go back and look at some other scenarios here as well. So before we do that, let's take a look. So this is an example of the localization. So Microsoft has 36 languages configured already. You can add others if you need to. But if we can pick Spanish or French, and then if I sign in, it translates that to whatever language I've selected. So let's go back again. And part of this demo application, it gives you the ability to sort of try out different sign-in policies. You can also switch industries if you prefer banking or wellness. You can do that as well. But well, this is the important stuff that we'll look at today. So that was local only. Actually, that was local and social. I don't know why it's labeled as local only. But you can have local and social username with inline age gating. So this is something you can do out of the box as well. If you have certain requirements that your users have to be of a certain age, you can have some age gating. So when they're creating their account or when they're logging in, they have to verify their age. You can log in with a telephone number instead of a username and password. So this also supports passwordless authentication. So you can do things like use the Microsoft or Google Authenticator apps to authenticate, etc. You can do a phone-based one-time password, or you can use a time-based one-time password for multi-factor authentication. So let's do social username and inline age gating. And we'll go back here and we'll sign in again. Oops, let's go back. Since I don't speak French, let's go back and switch back to English. Okay, so that brings us back. If I did it right and I click on sign up, so here you can see a similar experience here, sign in name, user password, etc. In this case, we're using a sign in name instead of the email address that the user will log in with, but we're also capturing an email address and are verifying that with email verification. The account ID that the user enters, and then the user has to select their, their birth date, whatever their birth date is. And then if they're of a proper age, a certain age, then the account will be created. Otherwise, they'll be presented with a nice friendly error message. Let's go back and take a look at some of the others. So let's do social and phone based. So here I can sign in with phone number and password instead of a username and password. So a lot of people are doing prefer to use phone numbers instead of creating yet another username or using their email in this case. So it's phone number and password. So they would enter their phone number, the password, and then they would be sent a verification code on their phone that they would enter and validate. So this is a woodgrovedemo.com. If you want to play with this, it's you can have fun with all of the different combinations if you want. But let's take a look now at let's see. So here we're back in our B2C tenant. Mark showed you most of this, so we'll just go through this real quickly. There's a good getting started, so it kind of walks you through the process. Create your tenant, register your application, add your identity providers, and create your user flows. Mark talked about user attributes, company branding, etc. The user flows, again, are relatively easy to get started with. So I can pick a out-of-the-box user flow and create. And I give it a name, select which identity providers I want to use in this particular flow, and then select the attributes to collect from the user and the claims to return to my application. So when they log in with this particular flow, if we want certain claims to be returned to us, we would just simply check those here and they would come back as part of the claims. Let's go switch over to and take a look at Visual Studio. So starting from scratch, when you create a new web application, so if we're starting off creating a new ASP.NET core web application, the way to get started with the B2C is to change the authentication method. So by default, it's no authentication. We're probably used to seeing individual user accounts. Let's try that once more. Okay, let's cancel that. And let's try this again. Okay. All right, let's skip that since that doesn't appear to be working now. So what that should provide you with is, actually, let's go here. It presents you with this dialog. So when you create a new application, you'll pick change authentication, you'll select individual user accounts, and then you get the option to use your own database or connect to an existing user store in the cloud. So in here, you would just fill in all of the information from your B2C tenant, the domain name, application ID, and then these are the policies for that you've defined in B2C for sign in or sign up, for password reset, and then optionally, if you want to provide a policy for profile editing, you can do that. Okay, so let's go here. This is an example of a .NET Core web application that's already been created. So it uses a NuGet package for Azure B2C UI that does all of the heavy lifting for you. So really, in this application, all you really have to do is configure the authentication service. And then we'll look at the configurations for that, and then simply use authentication. So it's pretty easy to get started. And this is the configuration. So again, this is the information that you would have filled in that dialog when you created the app. It is stored in the application settings, and that's it. So let's try to run this and see what happens. Okay, so here's our nice, beautiful web application. You can see I'm not signed in. So if I click on sign in, let's sign out because it remembered me. All right, let's try again, sign in. There we go. So I've already registered with my Outlook email address and signed in. I could have also signed in with Facebook or Microsoft in this particular account. I can sign up. Again, this is the sort of the out-of-the-box experience, with the exception that the logo, your company logo, has been added to this dialog, and then the background, of course. So if I sign in, I can see that I am now signed into my application. And if I go look at the claims, I can see the claims returned for this this flow. So here's the flow that I've associated with the sign in. It's this sign in, sign up flow. And these are all of the claims that came back with that flow. So again, back in the Azure portal, when we configure the flows, we select which claims get returned. And we select, again, things like country, city, et cetera, are things that the user would provide as part of their profile. So if I click on my name again, that will take me to my profile flow. So here's where I can update the city I live in, the country or the region, my name, first name and last name, etc. And again, these are all definable to whatever attributes you want to capture. You can define those in the flow, configure them, and they show up here like magic. If I continue, it will go and update that. And then if I go back to claims, I can see we have a different set of claims here because my profile flow returns only a smaller set of claims. So again, configurable. This is just to demonstrate that there's a different token returned through each user flow. Sign out, things like password reset. So if we sign out and sign in and say, I forgot my password, I can click on that and type in and it will send me a verification code. It may take a while for that to get here, but the idea here is that, again, just like any other site, you paste in the verification code, click verify, and then you could go and update your password. So again, this is out-of-the-box functionality. If you got less than 50,000 users, it's free. Why would you want to build this? Very nice user experience. So a lot you can do there. Let's take a look at one more application. This is a .NET framework application. Very similar. It's a little more work to get it up and running, but this uses the MSAL, the Microsoft Authentication libraries. Again, similar configuration. Your client ID, client secret, Azure AD instance, tenant, etc. This is the NuGet package that it uses. And then to get it started, there's a little bit more work to do here. And again, we in this particular case, we added roles because we wanted roles back. So we have a custom user policy that will go out and query through the Microsoft Graph and get those roles back. So doable, again, works in web applications. You can do it in single page applications as well if you're using Angular or whatever. There's libraries and NuGet packages for those as well. GitHub, there's several examples of how to integrate with those kinds of applications. Desktop applications, mobile applications, Android, iOS, etc. You can use this for all of those applications. Let me see. I think we are just about to the end. Let me see if there was anything else. Localization we talked about. Integration with your custom business systems. Customer ID. If you want to look up a customer in your customer system, and all of those things again are doable through a REST API. Multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is not free. I believe it's 3 cents per event. So if you need to use multi-factor authentication, that you still get 50,000 free monthly active users, but every time there's an MFA event, that's 3 cents per event. Still very economical. Auditing and logs. So all of the auditing and logging is done and available in the Azure portal, B2C portal. You can get all kinds of activity and usage insights from the logs. Again, if you had to build that, that's not a simple task. So, okay, I think that was it. Let's switch back to our presentation. And if you want some assistance, if we can help you, we would love to do that. We can help you set up your tenant. We can help you to integrate with your identity providers or migrate users, architect solutions, help you retrofit your applications, or even migrate your applications to Azure if they're not already in the cloud. I think we have a couple of minutes. Are there, Mark, do you know if there are any questions?
I didn't see any in the chat. Let me just check again. Oh, sorry. Okay, question about recording. We'll be posting the recording of this presentation on the Bennett Adelson website shortly after this. I think that was the only questions that we had. Okay, well, thanks, Rick, for your time there, and thanks everyone for attending. I hope you found this useful. And like I said, we'll be posting the recording on our website, so you can review it, and feel free to reach out if you got any questions about the content. Thanks, everybody.